3 test. First it says find g of f of 0. So you got to put 0 into f, and 2 to the 0 is 1 times 0.5 is 0.5. So this becomes g of 0.5. And so if we put 0.5 in there, 5 times a half is 2.5, minus 12 is minus 9.5. This says put x into g, so that gets us the 5x minus 12, and put that into f, and so that's what goes in place of the x in f, so we get f composite g of x is 0.5 2 times 2 to the x, but the x becomes 5x minus 12. And you can't multiply this because this is to a power, and power comes before multiplication, so that's where you have to leave it. C, find h inverse of x. So that means we just turn around the points. So instead of 4, -1, it's -1, 4. Instead of 3, 2, it's 2, 3. Instead of 1, 4, it's 4, 1. And instead of -1, 4, it's 4, -1. Now, I've noticed that this is not a function. Okay, g inverse of x. So we have g, and to find its inverse, first we change g of x to y equals 5x minus 12. And then we switch the y and the x, and we get x equals 5y minus 12. Then we solve for y, so I'll add 12 to both sides. Divide both sides by 5. And then write it as g inverse. G inverse of x is x plus 12 over 5. And since the addition's in the numerator, you can distribute the 5 to each of these, and it'd be 1/5 x plus 12/5. Now it says determine f of h of x. So we got to put stuff into h, and the only things we know how to put into h are 4, 3, 1, and -1. So that'll be our domain, and so we're going to make a list of what happens here. If I put in 4, 4 becomes -1. But -1 is what we put into f. So if I have -1 in here, 2 to the -1 is a half, times a half is 1/4, or 0.25. The next thing I can put in for h into h is 3, and 3 becomes a 2, but I'll start with a 3, and it'll become 2, 2. 2 in here, 2 to the 2 squared is 4, times a half is 2. And then the next thing I get to put in is 1, and 2, I get to put in 1, excuse me, I got distracted by my computer. I put in 1 and I get 4, 2 to the 4th, that's 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, and then times a half is 8. And finally, I can put in -1, and negative 1 gives me 4 also. So that would be 16 times a half is 8. Graph f of x. Well, I know it's an exponential and it's going to go up. So it's got a growth factor of 2. So f of x is 0.5 times 2 to the x. So 2 to the x, 2 to the 0 is 1, 2 to the 1 is 2, 2 to the second is 4, and it would look something like this, and it's a half and a quarter. But then it's times a 0.5, which is on the outside, so it actually does a compression by a half. And so it'll go through 0.5. Instead of 2, it'll go through 1. Instead of 4, it'll go through 2. And 2 to the third is 8, so it'll go through 4, half of that. And half of a half is a quarter, half a quarter is an eighth. So now I just need to make it clear what my units are here. So this is 2 this way and 2 that way. Explain why f of x is 1 to 1. 1 to 1 means it passes the vertical line test, which it does, and it passes the horizontal line test. Or, in other words, for every x there's one y, and for every y there's one x. For one x for one y, and one y for one x. One x for one y, and vice versa. Or passes the vertical and horizontal line tests. And then find f inverse. So first we start by making the f of x be y. Switch the y and x. And then we got to solve for the y. So we want to get, this is on the outside, this is 0.5, so we're going to get rid of it. To get rid of a half, we multiply by 2. To get the power down, we'll rewrite this as a log using the idea that, sorry, I did that. Y and x, then switch the x and y. To get rid of a half, I multiply by 2. And then I'm going to use the rule that says the change logs to powers. That means b to the a power equals x is the same as log base b of x equals a. So the base is 2, so it's log base 2 of 2x equals y. And then finally we write it as the inverse. F inverse of x is log base 2 of 2x. Okay. That's page 1. Page 2. The following exact values. So 1/5 to make 125. 125 is 5 to the third. So we have 1/3 of, to what power do we take 1/5 to get 125. 125 is 5 to the third. So we have 1/3 of 1/5. So to change a 5 to a 1/5, we put a negative on it. So that's 1/5 to the -3. So the -3 comes down, and so we have 1/3 times -3. And to what power did it take 1/5 to get 1/5? It's -3. So all of this is -3, in other words. So we got 1/3 times -3, which is -1. Now, another way to think about this is times this, so I could take this up as the power, and I could say log 1/5 of 125 to the 1/3, and 1/3 means cube root, and the cube root of 125 is 5. So I'd have log 1/5 equals 5. And so what power do I take 1/5 to get 5? I take 1/5 to the -1 to flip it over and becomes 5. So it's still -1. Okay, this says e to the ln base ln, which is log base e of 2 pi. Well, e to the ln e, they cancel out, and so I just get 2 pi. And this is log to this says to what power do I take 10 to get 10 to the e? Well, that's going to be e. Or another way to look at it is e comes down and it becomes el log base 10 of 10. What power did I take 10 to get 10? That's 1. So I get e times 1, which is e. Solve for x in this. Well, 9 and 81, I could go to base 3, but 81 is just 9 squared. So I could say 9 to the 2x plus 3 is equal to 9 squared, 81, to the 2x minus 1. And here I'd multiply the powers, and I would get 9 to the 2x plus 3 equals 9 to the 4x minus 2. Since they have the same bases, the powers must be the same, so 2x plus 3 must equal 4x minus 2. Subtract 2x from both sides. This will leave 2x here. Add 2 to both sides. Divide by 2. And that's our answer. And this one says, find this. Well, if it was out here, this would be fine. I could just type it in my calculator, but if it's in here, it's good to use that change of power rule again. So this says, to what power do I take the square root of 5 to get x? I take this to the 6th, so I get the square root of 5 to the 6th equals x. And that's what x is. We could also continue on here, because the square root means 1/2 power, so this is 5 to the 1/2 to the 6th equals x, and then I would multiply the powers, and I get 5 cubed, because half of 6 is 3, multiplying, is x, and 5 cubed is 125.